What is going on, everybody? It is Mark Cardula, lead faculty and CEO at Modern Pain Care, where we make you the complete clinician. Today's episode of the Modern Pain Podcast comes basically from a few issues that, and I don't even want to say issues, but discussions, because Jarod and I both are involved in DPT education. I am a clinical assistant professor at Midwestern University. Jarod will talk about his affiliations and his teaching gigs as well. But the challenges that come with that is, I do things in the clinic that are a little different than how we are teaching folks in DPT school. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it really gets DPT students freaked out. Like, this is what I'm learning, yet this is what I'm seeing you guys do in clinic. So we're gonna unpack that a little bit. Jared's got a little bit he'll speak of to his experience with DPT education. But before we do that, let's check in with Jared. How are you doing, Jared?
Man, I'm doing well. As we talked about before we came on live, it is crunch time. Finally, I'm living in shambles right now, boxes to the ceiling, stuff a mess everywhere, because we're about to move this Friday, finally, just a couple of days away. I'm sorry, guys, if you hear some technical difficulties. I broke my laptop charger yesterday, so I broke out the dinosaur this morning to do some recording on. So hopefully the quality is still there.
It's sounding good actually right now, brother. So the dinosaurs still doing it. It's just like those PT dinosaurs, they still can get some things done once in a while. No, we won't go there because that's always another touchy. Maybe that's a different podcast. But anyway, let folks know a little bit about your DPT education, kind of, and maybe a little bit of what prompted today's discussion from the DPT education side of things.
Sure. So some of you might know I've been adjunct faculty at the University of North Texas Health and Science Center DPT program for about 7 years now. So I do a lot of lab instructing in the orthopedics curriculum, some guest lecturing. I pop into various other courses just for maybe a guest lecture. I do teach kind of some of the pain curriculum as well. So every year, you get done, or every semester, you get done with your course, and you get your course feedback. They go through and they rate all of the professors and that sort of thing. I got my course feedback back this week, and always really enjoy that because I want to see. Of course, you want to see good things, but you also want to see like, hey, what can I do better? Um, and overall, had some pretty good feedback, some pretty good comments. But two people made a comment that stood out to me and made me reflect a little bit. Um, and part of this is because I walk in two worlds. I have this social media presence and kind of, uh, I guess, personality as somebody that is trying to be up to date and the most evidence based, and maybe try to rock the boat a little bit to push the profession forward. So the comments were, man, overall, Dr. Hall he's pretty good, but it really rubs me the wrong way when he teaches one thing in class and then he goes on social media and talks about how that very thing that he taught in class is not accurate or not correct or not right. And I think that is a really valid criticism. I think that um, in one hand, I want to make sure that I'm sensitive to that, and I'm conscious about the way that I broach those subjects, and maybe I need to be a little bit, uh, more gentle when I go about things on social media, especially if we're directly talking about it or in close proximity and time frame to talking about it in class. Because a lot of these people, I guess, end up following me on social media as well. A lot of these students do, but in the other hand, it also whoa, getting a little wild with the intro here.
I don't know what happened there, brother. But here we go. Let's just keep going. You were. I don't know what happened there. The tech gremlins popped in, and here you go. As you were. Sorry.
It's probably my dinosaur pressing buttons.
Could be, dude. Could
Uh,
be.
but then in the other hand, I think it brings up a really good discussion point, and I think that's what we wanted to talk about this morning: the difference between what we teach, what we have to teach to some degree in PT school, and what real clinical practice might look like, and what the most up to date, evidence informed concepts of things that we do and teach maybe are right now.
Yeah. And one of the, and I believe this is my buddy Seth Peterson who mentioned this in a post. We were talking, and I think it was a DPT Students Group, because there's always angst there. That's usually folks frustrated with some of the stuff, and or it might have been the Cal U group. I don't remember, but and I remember being a little frustrated with this as a student as well, because you'd go out on clinical rotations, or you were, well, I didn't really have social media back when I was going through, so which was probably a good thing actually, but I could understand how, like, what everything's getting proposed is what we should and shouldn't be doing really can conflict with what you're currently being taught in DPT school. Now, you can be, and I probably was this person a little bit, you can be a jerk about it and be that difficult student in class and be the, there's nothing wrong with questioning, because I think it's important to have discussions. And I do think there's valid questioning if we have maybe some DPT educators who need to kind of update the what they're teaching in the curriculum. I'm not saying that, and I hold myself to that, I think, but we also need to hold ourselves to what accrediting bodies demand us to teach, CAPTE, and these things that really qualify students. Because what DPT programs are there to do is to get you passing a board exam, to get you to be a safe practitioner. It ain't going to get you to be a good, it'll get you to be safe and solid. I'm not saying it won't make you be good, but to be good, you got to go well beyond what you learn in DPT school to be a great clinician, to really move forward and do what you want. But you got to recognize that healthy scientific professions should be questioning what you're being taught currently in school. If they're not, I'd be more worried that what is our scientific process that's going on in our profession, that we're still rolling with things that have been going on from 1970. Now, there still are some things that hang around maybe longer than they're welcome, and longer than science says they should stick around, and that probably reflects a little bit of the processes that we need to improve, maybe from when we take a research study and start generating maybe even systematic review level data, and it starts questioning some of the things we're taught in PT school. Then I think it's our job as DPT school administrators and in our professional bodies and in those CAPTE that we need to start having processes that move that information forward more quickly, and it being more reflective on board examinations. Because I know board exams were inundated with the CPRs, clinical prediction rules and stuff with that, and it just seems like other things didn't really make it that quickly. So, what's been your experience with kind of that, I guess, conflict that you see out there in DPT education, as far as and this thought of, hey, what you're learning is kind of a history lesson, and we're always are learning it. And I can't remember the exact quote, but it's basically in medical school they would say 50% of what you're going to learn here is going to be proven untrue. The problem is we don't know what the 50% is, and that should, it should make you feel a little uncomfortable, but it should also make you feel like, hey, great, we got a good, healthy scientific profession that's not going to just sit on its laurels. It's going to question. It's going to move forward. It's going to, cast doubt on some of the things. There's a lot of interventions that have gone to the wayside because science asked us so. Now, of course, there's still fringe areas that might still try to hold on to certain interventions, of course. But what's been your experience with that kind of conflict that you see, Jarod, as far as DPT education is concerned?
Yeah, I've talked about this with other people that I teach with, and I think there's two main themes as to why PT school to some degree can be, and let's not just say PT school. Let's say chiro school, let's
Mm-hmm.
say nursing school, let's say med school. All of these things fall under the same category. Why these schools are a little bit of a history lesson. Number one, you kind of already alluded to it, the board exam. The board exam is necessary to be a PT, to be a practicing clinician, right? You've got to take it and you've got to pass it. And the thing about the board exam is it has question writers, item writers. I considered being an item writer for a while until I found out the process and felt kind of frustrated with it. I guess I can't yell and scream too much because I didn't undertake the process of becoming an item writer. But when you write a question for a board exam, that question has to be essentially pulled directly from a textbook that's in a PT curriculum. It has to be able to be cited from a textbook. So let's talk about textbooks, right? Textbooks typically last for 2 to 3 years before a new edition comes out. When a textbook is written, there is usually a backbone or a foundation that is built into it because we're on edition 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, right? And then, each edition just changes a little bit of stuff. It just updates a little bit of information, but there's still that core information that probably goes back a couple decades, right? For the most part, maybe even longer for some of it. And those textbooks are written by people, and it takes people a little while to write those. And when they update those people use new research studies that have been published, right? So let's say you're starting with a researcher doing some research. Well, that research study maybe takes 2 years to actually be completed and go through the publication process. Well, then it's probably going to take another year or two for somebody to read it. Then it's going to take another year or two for somebody to write that textbook and actually get that textbook published. And then it's going to take another year or so for somebody to write a question off of that textbook. And then it's going to take 2 to 3 years for that question to actually go through the vetting process and be approved to be on the board exam. So what we're sitting here is like at the absolute fastest, right? Information gets onto the board exam in 6 years, and probably more on average of about 10 years. So the most up-to-date questions on the boards are roughly a decade or so old. Then, meanwhile, in clinical practice, you have a bunch of people who are very nimble. Um, and you can make changes if you're at the forefront of keeping up with stuff. You can make changes in clinical practice pretty quickly because a lot of us are lucky enough to be connected to those very researchers doing that research on social media or through research groups and article review groups and stuff like that. So we're lucky enough to know about research before it even gets published, or the very day that it gets published. You get stuff pre-print, you get to read it, you get to talk with those researchers about it. They pop onto a podcast and they're giving you all that information. You get to reflect on it, and that's pretty immediate, right? It's within a couple few months of something coming out that a huge sect of the practicing clinicians know about that new evidence, rather than the whole tenure process for the board. So that's one, right? We're living in the past a little bit just because it's a really cumbersome process to have an objective and well-written test that has good questions that aren't off the wall, or that they pass the bar of getting actually on the board exam. So that's what PT school has to teach to those CAPT standards and the foundational underpinnings of the board exam. And then secondarily, what has to happen is students have to go out on clinical rotations, right? And clinical rotations, well, they have practicing clinicians that graduated in the past, and they're going to have practice patterns from the past, because most people are not going to keep up with the most evidence-based new thought processes, etc. So the vast majority of clinical instructors are probably going to be dated a little bit. So we need students to know the lingo and the concepts that clinical instructor is going to expect them to practice with. Because if that clinical instructor gets a student who says, well, that way that you practice is completely stupid. I learned something totally opposite and learned that what you do is way dated and not accurate, etc. Guess what? The clinical instructor is going to get pissed off at the school and not take any more students because they don't want that headache. So we have to make sure students know a little bit about a lot of things, a little bit about a whole lot of different thought processes, philosophies, approaches, because they're going to get that on their clinical internships. And we need clinical instructors. It's hard to find enough decent clinical instructors, so we can't run them off because we're teaching something diametrically opposed to the way that they believe in practice. So those are the two big themes as to why PT school can be a little bit of a history lesson.
Yeah, I think you bring up some good points as far as the process from research to textbook to test. That is a arduous process that can take some time, and then also just the CI situation and dated patterns. I think we're all dated. Each day we're getting more dated. It's just a question of how dated will you allow yourself to become, and then are you going to constantly have a updating process where you're actively involved in gathering research and all that stuff. So I don't that issue doesn't, and as you pointed out, it's not unique to PT education. Physicians, OTs, everybody, chiros, like you mentioned, all. The question is, you should be challenging your profession. I'd be more worried if, again, like I said earlier, if it's something where you're still learning the same things from 1970 something, when and science isn't asking any questions of what you're doing. It's just, like I said, sitting tight and thinking you got it all figured out, which is a good way to become obsolete in the world of healthcare, in the world of trying to better understand human pain experiences and all that good stuff. So yeah, and again, how you navigate that as a student can, and I probably Jarod can, speak his own, but I have not always navigated that challenge well in my past, as far as been vocal and questioned, and probably got under the skin of a few teachers, and but again, you can make those history lessons of it. Take it for what it is. It's a history lesson. Yes, there are some probably DPT educators. I hear stories of teaching and really pounding the fist about how we need to do some things about feeling millimeters of wiggles and things like that. I think that's something that we as educators, we got to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and not overly identify ourselves with processes. We owe it to our students to not allow that to happen, to where we're overly identified on any theory or thought process or concept. Definitely can declare our biases, which I try to do every time I say, this is the way I do it. It's not the only way to do it. There's other thought processes out there. You guys need to learn how to think for yourself, all that good stuff. But as a student, you don't need to be a jerk about it, which I think, again, I've been a jerk about it to in various scenarios. And whether you're a student in a, lecture, or you're a student in a clinic, you respect that, even if you feel like, man, dated and still doing, the stuff that I pretty confident the science is questioning. Maybe you step back from those experiences and see, well, what is it about this CI and what they're doing that might be gaining outcomes outside of maybe this dated theory. So you can still learn a lot, and there's still a lot you can get out of clinical education if you just come in with an open mind that, hey, maybe this isn't the most up-to-date theories, but man, I'm still going to get to interact with other humans in pain. I can still practice a lot of different things that can allow me to move forward and grow as a clinician, despite the fact that the CI that's training you, it may not be is up to date. So, because I agree, I mean, I'm not involved in it, but I see it closely, as far as securing DPT education sites to do clinical sites, and the folks that work in those ACCE roles are working their butts off and doing all stressful clinicals getting canceled, especially with COVID. It's been horrible. I wouldn't want to be in those positions if you paid me whatever, because it's been a stressful thing. So I think we need to give thanks to a lot of those ACCEs who are working that. I think it's a thankless job, because we just assume we pay our tuition, that this stuff just happens, that we have these clinicals. It's a lot of work that goes into that in securing sites. So it's our job, as I would hope that as students, that we maintain relationships. Now, of course, there's always going to be occasional red flag situations that need to be handled, but I think we need to go into to respect and be thankful that we have clinical sites that still allow us to come in and practice our craft, hone our craft as a student. It's just something I think it's way taken for granted. But anyway, I think we've touched upon things as much as I feel like we need to go in depth. We had a little tech glitch there, but I think we got that all figured out. But any other parting thoughts you have for folks before we wrap up this episode, sir?
Yeah, as you were speaking, I had one more thought that crossed my mind, and I just wanted to make it a point to say, um, this was really, really valuable, and this is an example of why it's so important to give critical but respectful feedback. And this person was respectful. They just said, "Hey, this rubs me the wrong way when this happens. There's nothing wrong with that," and that caused me to stop and think, well, dang, okay, we need to talk about this. All the comments that I got about how great I was, I just, patted myself on the back and smiled and moved on about my day, but I didn't reflect, right? So I think we need to normalize, make it okay to give that critical feedback, because now we've had a podcast episode about this. It's been brought to the front of my attention. I'm going to be more purposeful and conscious about the way that I navigate things on social media. Hopefully, this podcast episode gets out to a lot of students and new grads, and helps them understand that whole process, and it makes people feel better about it. It opens up conversations, right? So we've got to normalize giving critical but respectful feedback, because nobody grows from attaboys and pats on the back. We grow from recognizing what we could do better. And that is a form of feedback. It's a form of growth. It's a form of mentorship. Really, is having that critical feedback.
Exactly. It is one of those things that I think not enough? Do we get that critical feedback? And for some of you guys who are navigating some of the challenges as far as you coming out of school and maybe you've gone through the history lesson as PT school and you're trying to figure out how you can keep things up to date. If you ever have any interest in having any discussions with Jarod or I on if mentoring and coaching is right for you in your practice, don't hesitate. Reach out to us, modernpaincare.com/supercharged, and we're happy to have discussions to see if that works for you. Been having some great discussions with clinicians, and it's been something that's really stimulated a lot of our podcasts, really, because we're trying to figure out what are the problems that folks are having that we can help them out with, and this is a big one. It's trying to resolve what you were taught versus what you see currently in the clinic. So hopefully this episode was helpful for you. Let's have some respectful dialogues in regards to DPT education and in what we're being taught and how we can move it forward, because it ain't gonna be helped out with the attaboys, but it also ain't gonna be helped out by this is crap and garbage that I'm being taught too, because that equally creates cognitive dissonance from both directions. So reach out to us if you have any questions or any other ideas of podcast topics that you'd like to have us talk about, and we will definitely put those in the hopper. But until next time, we will talk to you guys next week.